where we are with Juneteenth and with the people in the streets is that, yes, freedom must also always be cherished because the country was founded on the principle of independence and freedom. We as Black people have borne the burden of most of what is horrible about the country, but we've also been the ones that tried to make America live into those documents. Do what you said you would do in the Constitution, what you said you would do in the Declaration of Independence. Juneteenth is that holiday that encompasses it all. And for us, for Black people in particular, we have to remember as well, because if you don't fight for freedom, if you don't continue to make certain that your children, your children's children understand what it is to be free and to fight for it, then you will lose it.
Although today is the 155th anniversary of Juneteenth, many Americans are just now learning about the significance of this holiday. Historians and educators say this is because many children aren't taught about major Black historical events in school. NBCBLK reporter Janelle Ross is in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where there's a big celebration going on. She has a must-read new piece on NBCNews.com entitled From Juneteenth to the Tulsa Massacre. Janelle, you're on the ground. What's the mood like?
It's an interesting mood. I would say it's very festive here in what's known as the Greenwood District, which is exactly the heart and center of what used to be known as Black Wall Street. They've modified their usual celebration a bit. Usually it's a pretty big festival that goes on all day, well into the night, in a field a little ways from here, maybe about a block and a half from here. But this year they've scaled things down largely because of the coronavirus. There are a number of people here. There are many of your sort of traditional activities. There are singers, there will be speeches, and of course there are also people here registering people to vote. But then there is this sort of added element. I think that I've been told that this is perhaps one of the more diverse crowds at a Juneteenth event here in Tulsa. There certainly is a diverse crowd here. About 6 minutes away to the south and west in downtown proper, there are people already lined up to try to see the president at the Box Center, and that is a decidedly not diverse crowd. I would say also that there are a lot of people who are certainly in conversations with people talking about the things that are going on in our country, from the protests to certainly the issues with policing. And in keeping with something that I heard you mention, Trymaine, I had a conversation with a gentleman who is a baby boomer, grew up here in Tulsa, was born here in Tulsa, and told me that he was taught absolutely nothing about the massacre right here, that began right here at this intersection in Tulsa when he was in school. And the only reason that he really learned much about it is he had a high school job working in the library and saw references to it in other newspapers and in other cities and in books. And that is how he even became aware that it had occurred.
Janelle, let me ask you this, just really quickly. Do you get the sense there on the ground that this year, the Juneteenth commemoration has added significance in any way?
I think so, yes. I mean, again, I think some people seem to be here, I think perhaps as a show of solidarity, a show of interest. And then certainly, it does not take long. If you strike up a conversation with almost anyone here, it really doesn't take long for anyone to get to the issue of policing and police accountability. It doesn't seem to take long for people to then move on to broader issues of inequality, in particular economic inequality. Obviously, in an area that once had a thriving Black business district that was known all over the world, there are a lot of concerns about the issues that seem to stand in the way of so many Black businesses being able to function, open, begin business, much less thrive. And certainly there are Black-owned businesses here now, but this is a whisper of what this area used to produce.
Janelle Ross, thank you very much. Keep up the good work. Your reporting has been spot on over the last several weeks, so thank you.
Thanks.
Back with me is Dr. Joseph and Anna Deavere Smith and Wes Moore. Dr. Joseph, let's get back into this wealth disparity. The typical white family has 10 times the wealth of the typical black family. Help us make sense of that. Give us a quick history on how we got to this moment.
Well, we get to the wealth disparity really in the aftermath of racial slavery and right after Juneteenth. African Americans had been promised 40 acres and a mule, and that promise was not kept. So instead of being able to have land, and there was 4 million free black women and men, most of them were living in the South in the former Confederacy. And when we think about what they were able to do was, instead of getting 40 acres and a mule, they got sharecropping, peonage, and the convict lease system, which criminalized blacks and really set up the first racial profiling system in the 19th century that continues into the 21st century. So there was really this great wealth disparity starting in the late 19th century. We've had a movement for reparations when we talk about that wealth disparity. The great historian Mary Frances Berry has the brilliant book, My Face is Black, My Face is True, about Callie House, a black woman who led, like black women have been leading for centuries, black freedom movements and black liberation struggles for pensions for formerly enslaved African-American women and men. Ultimately, she was unsuccessful, but even as we get deeper into the late 19th and early 20th century, black people founded towns even before Tulsa. They founded freedom villages in Texas and other places, Oklahoma. And many of those freedom towns and villages were ultimately massacred and victims of racial pogroms. Black people who did get a chance to buy land and settle hundreds of thousands of acres, a lot of times that land was lost through unscrupulous real estate deals. Courthouses refused to legitimize black wills, so they became heirs property, and many, many multiple descendants had access to them, and they could be taken advantage of by white real estate speculators. And then when we get into the 20th century and the creation of the New Deal and the Second World War, black people don't have access to the GI Bill. They don't have access to the 30-year FHA low-interest mortgages, which is how most of the white middle class is built. Homes that cost $50,000, $75,000 in 1950 would be worth $350,000 and $450,000 two generations later. That's the wealth that white families gave to their children in ways that African Americans never could get. So there's a reparations movement. We've got NCOBRA, National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations. We've got a great new book by Sandy Darity talking about reparations, the esteemed economist at Duke University. So when we think about wealth gaps, we have to remember black people built up the wealth in the United States. Scholars call it racial capitalism. I call it racist capitalism and white supremacist capitalism. And what black people have done is build up global capitalism, but never got the value that they produced, have it accrue to themselves or their neighborhoods. So we've consistently undervalued black neighborhoods and black property. And not only that, we've had banks like Wells Fargo and others during the Great Recession provide racist loans to black homeowners that they were calling mud loans. And so we're marginalized economically, both in terms of income, but certainly in wealth. So the conversations that we have to have when we're saying, how are we going to fix this, have to include reparations. And a movement for Black Lives has reparations as a policy agenda. This is not a check for every individual black person. This is investment in education, in housing, in transforming segregated, economically impoverished neighborhoods into beacons of investment and American citizenship and black dignity.
Wes, Dr. Joseph kind of took us the long route to where we are now, from right after Reconstruction into the present. And you work day to day trying to shrink this gap with families and communities every single day. When you look at those huge economic disparities, do you see a through line? And what's the lasting impact been on black communities?
The lasting impact on black communities has been devastating. And I think it's both in terms of how we've exposed levels of vulnerability. And I think we've seen how that's played itself out with COVID-19 and the fact that when you look at Black communities and brown communities, these are communities that have been hit double, both in terms of infection rates and also in terms of death rates. And that is completely because this is a virus that exposes pre-existing vulnerabilities. And so when you're looking at the fact that you have communities, for example, communities in West Baltimore, where half of the children are growing up with asthma, you know that that is a community that is going to be disproportionately hit when it comes to these introduction of illness. And so it's both about how there's an underlying vulnerability that is lasting, but also I think it's important to point out psychological. It's because when we're talking about the things such as how do we think about and how exactly are our children, what do they see when they think of themselves? One of the challenges I've always had when people say to me, and they say it almost in a passive way, they say, well, I don't see. But what they're essentially saying is, I don't see your Black. And they're saying it in a way that's making me think that it's making me feel better, without understanding that that's something that I'm proud of. That I want people, and both my children, but all children, to know of the legacy of books, and the legacy of truth, and the legacy of thinking about both we build up. Both has to be the actual operational infrastructure. But it's also about being honest about the pride that all of us should feel in the fact that we come from a survival and a growth and a king and queen legacy that in many ways has been robbed about how we think about our own involvement and our own engagement in this society.
Anna, COVID-19 has been described as a heat-seeking missile for vulnerable communities with layers of pre-existing conditions. I wonder how the collision of race and COVID-19, what it's revealed about America. And you talked earlier about the kind of psychic wounds and psychic trauma. When you see all of this colliding together, what does it reveal about who we are?
It makes me think about the failure in the 20th century to have not only, good health, but good healthcare workers. And by that, I mean, let's look at the whole medical community, a community that's used to making procedures or doing procedures, or this idea that I came across in the New York Times. I don't know the author, I'm so sorry, but the notion of the flawed Black body, that there's something the matter with you, and you have to do certain things to correct that. So to me, in the same way that we need to revise schools to make sure that our kids will stay in school and learn to be curious, learn to be joyous, learn to be kind, learn so many things and not get thrown out of school in the school to prison pipeline, we need to revise what medicine is to attach itself in a different way to diseases that are socially determined, chronic diseases in particular. If you have a doctor who looks down when you come in and doesn't want to have a conversation with you, there's no relationship. And real healing happens with a relationship. So if the doctors only want to do procedures, then we need other kinds of healthcare workers who want to bring people through the gauntlet, run the gauntlet with them to well-being.
Wes Moore, Dr. Peniel Joseph, and Anna Deavere Smith, thank you all so very much. Don't forget to catch the latest episode of my podcast, Into America. I talked to the Reverend William J. Barber II, the president of Repairers of the Breach and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, about the importance of building coalitions for lasting change and the campaign's upcoming virtual march on Washington. Download now wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again to all of my guests for joining me in this very important conversation. In this moment of great reflection, with freedom on our minds, perhaps there's a chance for us to finally get it right, to be who we say we are, to unburden ourselves from what has always been our greatest weakness, racism, and to rise together in the ideals that have always been our greatest strengths, freedom and equality. Thank you and good night.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.